Alright, so this Knife Thoughts video is going to be on this knife. And first off, I'm also going to be doing a companion article on this knife at knifethoughts.com. So definitely check that out. I'll have some good pictures of it and some other information, links to where you can get it and things like that. So definitely check out knifethoughts.com where an article will be coming soon, as well as my social media, Instagram, Facebook, etc., all at Knife Thoughts. And first off, this knife is on loan from River's Edge Cutlery. I go out to River's Edge Cutlery once a year when I'm competing at the Arnold Classic, and it's always a good time. Always get to check out a lot of really nice knives. There aren't really any big knife stores near me, so it's great to get to see the knives and talk with people about them. And when I was there, I was checking out, and they were nice enough to offer to let me try this knife and write a review on it. I did a pass around on the Spyderco Native Chief with them or through them, and I think that they liked how I did the video and review, and they were looking for people to test this knife. So first off, this is a new knife company called Finch Knife Company. And it's a company that was started officially about a year ago, but the owner, or one of the owners, told me that they've been in the works, working out the logistics and designs and such for a few years, but it officially was started about a year ago. So it's a very new knife company, and it's one that I've seen a lot of excitement for online. I've seen a lot of people posting about these knives on Instagram, Reddit, things like that. And so it's one that I was excited to get to try out and do a review for all of you. So this is the box. Now, this isn't an unboxing video. I've had this knife for about a week, and I've carried it every day that I've had it. I've used it and stuff like that. So it's not an unboxing, I just have it in the box to show how it comes packaged. So Finch Knife Company, you can see this emblem that they have, or logo. I do like that logo, and you'll see it later on the knife itself, but then it says, "Keep life from getting dull," and "Stillwell, Kansas." So that's where this company is based. Now, this knife is not made in Kansas, but I'll talk about that in a second. Let's open it up. So you see, first off, it has this sticker flipping the Finch, which is kind of funny, flipping the bird. I think it's a nod to that. And then it has this here, and this is a little information pamphlet type thing. It talks about safe usage of the knife. It's a tool, not a toy, as we know. Don't throw it, which I thought that one was kind of funny, because when you see the knife, it would be tough to throw this as a throwing knife. Never carry it while it's open. That makes sense, right? One thing that I found was interesting, they say open your flipper knife with the same hand you write with. And you are more coordinated with the hand you write with, but I tried it, and you could definitely open it with your other hand, but that's just a safety thing, I guess. And you can read the rest of these. These are kind of just your typical safety things. But you see that the pictures on this are all from the outdoors. I'm going to talk about this knife's inspiration a little later, but first here is the warranty, and it's a pretty clear warranty. I think that if you've watched a lot of my videos, you've seen that warranties are something that I care about, but the wording of a warranty isn't always the important thing. It's how the company and how the people in the company actually enforce or stand behind the warranty. And I haven't had to use this knife's warranty, obviously. I've only had it a week, but from talking with the people at Finch Knife Company on Instagram, it sounds like they really are passionate about what they're doing and care about the knives that they're making, and I'm sure that they would stand behind the knife if you had any issues. But here's the knife, and it comes nicely packaged in the package itself. You can see that it has this foam cutout that the knife fits right down into. And the first thing you notice, it is a small knife, and it has a very interesting design. When I've shown this to people, other people who enjoy knives or knife enthusiasts, one of the first things that they say is that it's a cool looking knife. It's an interesting and nice design itself, how it looks. And I agree with that. I think it's kind of a striking design. And after talking with the people at Finch Knife Company, it does look like it's inspiration. So this knife was inspired by some fishing lures, some traditional fishing lures or vintage fishing lures that one of the owners used and really enjoyed, and it really does look like them. Now, I'm not going to put a picture of those. I don't have any of them. I'm not going to put a picture of those in this video, so that's another reason why you should check out the article. I will be using actually their picture of the inspiration fishing lures that were a part of the design inspiration for this knife. And I do think that this knife looks like it. They have kind of a flat nose like this that leans forward like the blade does, and then they get thinner at the tail like the handle of this knife does. So I do think that they look inspired. And then the other thing is there's 3 colors so far of this knife. There's the black, which this is, and you can see that it's called the Black Shiner. And then there's also a yellow and a natural G10. And those actually correspond with the colors, or a few of the colors of those vintage fishing lures that the owner has. And that's the picture that will be up on the article. So one more time, don't forget to check out the article. But the name of this specific knife is the Runtly. And that's, again, inspired by the name of those vintage fishing lures, which are called Runt fishing lures. So I think that that's really cool that the owner, or at least the owners, are basing these knives in this knife company off of some of their passions outside of knives: fishing, photography, a couple of the ones that they mentioned on their website. And I think that's a really cool thing. It gives it kind of a unique flavor. And then the second thing really that I noticed about this knife is that it has some traditional knife aesthetic inspirations. First of all, it has this nail nick. And being that this is a flipper knife, I kind of wondered why they went with a nail nick. So I actually asked, and they said that when they were showing this to their father, who really only has traditional slip joints in his knife collection, he wasn't real confident in opening it with the flipper. And so they added this nail nick to kind of call back to his traditional slip joint collection. And I appreciate that, because if you watch my channel and check out my website, you know that most of the knives that I enjoy are traditional knives. Certainly I enjoy modern knives like this, but I really enjoy the traditional knife aesthetic, and I enjoy slip joints, and a lot of my knives do have nail nicks. So it's something that I appreciate. And then a second thing that I think is inspired by traditional knives is this shield that they do. So it looks like they're going to have this shield on all of their knives, or at least the next 2 knives after this that are coming out. And this is a pretty classically shaped shield. This would look at home on a traditional knife if it was a metal shield. But it has their logo, and I think it's good looking. Now, it would be more traditional, more like a traditional slip joint if this was up in this area here, although some traditional slip joints do have their shields down lower on the handle. So I think that that's a cool little addition to give it that traditional feel. And one thing I didn't realize until I saw it on social media somewhere, this is actually a glow-in-the-dark shield. So if it gets enough light and then you look at it in the dark, it will glow. I shone my flashlight on it and then covered it up, and you could see it. So that's kind of a cool feature that honestly I didn't even realize until I saw someone else posting about it. So it has that traditional knife inspiration. Not a whole lot. The shape of it is not that traditional, which I'll talk about here in a second. But one last thing with this nail nick, I mentioned that the shape of the blade looks like the shape of the fishing lure. I think that adding this nail nick actually looks a little bit like the eyes that are painted onto those fishing lures. So they didn't actually mention that when I asked about the nail nick, why they added the nail nick, but that's one of the things that I thought, is that this nail nick does look like an eye on a fishing lure. Now, moving on to the design itself, it isn't a super traditional design. This is a pretty square handle with this rounded area here, and that just kind of helps with the flipper. I do like that from a practical standpoint. If this area was not rounded here, it would be a little bit tougher and I think a little bit more uncomfortable to, you know, flick this knife open. And it is a little bit of a fidget, you know, toy. You can flick it open and enjoy the action. So if it didn't have that rounded off area, I do think it would be less comfortable flipping it open. But with that rounded off area, it's really easy, in my opinion, to flip it open. Even with this very tiny looking flipper tab, this flipper tab does look really small, but because of this rounded area, it's pretty easy to get to. You just kind of put your finger there and pull back. It's really a light switch flipper. It's not, you really can't do it at all as a push button flipper. It's 100% a light switch flipper. So it does flip really, really well with that little design feature, and that shows that they put a lot of thought into it, right? They could have brought this knife to market with just a square top on the handle and it would have flipped okay, but it wouldn't have been quite as nice. So that shows that they put a lot of thought into that. Another thing with the handle here is that there is a small cutout for the lock bar. So it's a liner lock knife and there's a small cutout there to get your thumb in. It works fine. I don't think it would have hurt aesthetically to make this cutout a little bit larger, and I think that it would have helped utility or for practicality. So not that it's really, I can't say that it's difficult to get at that, but you do have to kind of press in and then press on the lock bar. So press towards the back of the handle, then press in. Now, I've got big, wide, kind of fat thumbs, so maybe if you had more normal sized hands, it would be easier to get in at that liner, but I do think that it wouldn't have really hurt the aesthetics to make this cutout a little bigger, and it would have made this a little bit easier to get at. So as for the lock, it came with perfect lockup for me. This one, it has moved over ever so slightly, but that's fine. It hasn't had any blade stick or anything like that. This is a steel on steel, so you shouldn't have the issues of blade or lock stick like on a titanium on steel liner lock. And it came with great lockup, no blade play in either direction, even when unlocked, no side-to-side blade play. And this lock bar does have a little cutout. You can see that it has a little cutout, but being that it's a steel lock bar rather than a titanium lock bar, I think that it still has plenty of strength, especially for a knife this size. Another thing on this handle, we'll move on to the clip. The clip is a sculpted titanium clip, and I believe, and I like it a lot. It's very minimalistic. It's just a straight bar, and I think that it works really well. But I will say that because of the size of this knife, I haven't carried it clipped as much as I've carried it just in my pocket. So I think it's a really nice clip. You can see some machining marks that actually look nice on it, in my opinion. But I've carried it mostly loose in my coin pocket, actually. Moving on to the blade. This blade is not really a traditional blade shape. It is actually similar to some cotton sampler blade shapes, although those are kind of a modified cotton sampler. It's what I would maybe call a cross between a sheepfoot and a coping blade. It's less of a sheepfoot because a sheepfoot, and I'll compare it to this knife, which is a Gradation Cutlery number 15. A sheepfoot has more of a rounded area where this spine meets the top of the spine. This is rounded slightly, you can see. It's not a hard cut like a true coping blade would be, but it's not as rounded as I would say most sheepfoot blades are. So it's not exactly a sheepfoot blade, but it's close to that, and it's somewhere between a sheepfoot and a coping blade. You can see that the blade has Finch on it, and I like that font that it's in. I think it looks good. Now, over here it says Runtly, and to be honest with you, I initially thought that this knife was called the Finch. So I'm glad I realized that it's called the Runtly, and they do have it back here, but it's not too big. A lot of people dislike billboarding, and it's actually not too big. I don't think I would consider this billboarding. It says Runtly and it says N690. Now, what it doesn't say is the country of origin. And like I said, this company is based in Kansas, but it is made in China. This knife was made in China, and I was told by River's Edge Cutlery that it's made by Best Tech. Now, I haven't had other knives made by Best Tech, but one thing that I do know is that China is producing a lot of really nice knives these days. A lot of knife companies coming from China or manufacturers and making some really high quality knives, especially flippers. And it seems to be really well made. So although it doesn't say where it's produced, and some people might take, a slight issue with that, I think that it's a well-made knife, and I don't care really that it's made in China. I do appreciate when knives are made in the United States, but I recognize that that can change the price point and things like that. So it is a somewhat unusual blade shape, but I found it to be a nice blade shape for a knife of this size. It's not a big knife, as you can see. I'll compare it again to the Gradation Cutlery 15. And the 15 has ever so slightly more edge. The handle on the 15 is also a little bit longer though. Comparing it to one of the better known modern knives around this size, this is a Spyderco Native 5. And you can see, again, even with the choil on the Native 5, the Native 5 has a little bit more edge than the Runtly. And again, the handle on the Runtly is smaller than the Native 5s. Comparing it to another traditional that a lot of people, especially those watching my videos, are familiar with, this is being that I do a lot of traditional knife reviews, this is a case trapper. You can see the trapper is significantly bigger than the Runtly. So it's a very small knife, and like I mentioned earlier, it's small enough that I actually carried this knife unclipped in my coin or watch pocket most of the time that I was carrying it. And it's a very, very little knife. And along with that, the blade length is pretty small. So you can measure it here. The blade the edge is about 2¼ inches, and the blade itself is about 2½ inches. Now it's right on the edge of 2½ inches. I would say it's probably, if you measure right from this top of the handle to the point, it's probably slightly under 2½ inches. And that's something that I like. Sometimes I see knives that are really small knives, but for whatever reason they make the blade just over or a little bit over 2½ inches. And there are some localities and places where you can take a knife that has a blade under 2½ inches, but it's illegal to take a knife with a blade over 2½ inches. So I do appreciate that this knife has a blade, being that it's this small, that it is actually under 2½ inches. So this knife should be legal pretty much anywhere a locking one-hand open knife is legal. There are very few places that you can have a locking one-hand open knife that 2½ inches is too long. In fact, I can't think of anywhere. So that's another nice thing. It's easy to carry. You can even carry it in your watch pocket because it's so small, and it should be legal as long as you're allowed to have a locking knife with one-hand opening. So I appreciate that. It's definitely not a, go out and build a shelter in the woods or prepare your dinner, slice up a tomato with it. You could slice a tomato with it. You could probably, cut a hot dog stick or something like that. But it's not a knife for huge jobs. It's a knife for EDC. You're going to be able to open packages really well. I've had a couple people when they saw this knife say that it looked like a really good box cutter. And I think that's a good description of its use. With this nice straight edge and what to me seems like a pretty well evenly ground and thinly ground main grind, it works well to cut up cardboard, open mail, open boxes, cut strings, and all that kind of typical EDC stuff that we actually use our knives for most of the time. So I like that about it, that it's a functional knife for being such a small knife. And one last note on the blade, you notice that it has a two-tone finish. It has kind of a satin with the brush strokes going along the blade, and then the grind is a tumbled finish. So it's a good looking knife, also being kind of an unusual looking knife. And I've enjoyed carrying it. I've enjoyed flipping it. Like I say, with this, smart design, it is really easy to flip. I believe that this is on ball bearings. I can't imagine that it isn't. One person who is another knife enthusiast, but more so from a self-defense perspective, I showed them this knife, and they thought from flipping it that it was an assisted knife. So that shows you that the detent is really dialed in. You can hear that as it closes. It really pulls the blade into that detent, and because that detent is nice and strong, it flips open really nicely. I've never had this knife fail to open the whole way. I'll see if I can even, so that's me purposely making it not open the whole way, but I've never had it where I was trying to open it and it didn't open the whole way. So really, really nice flipping action. You can see that it's well centered, maybe slightly towards the non-lock side, but nowhere near touching the liners. Like I say, really solid with the lockup, and just a nicely made knife as the actual construction goes. So I think it's a really cool little knife. It's something where I'm really looking forward to the future knife releases from Finch Knife Company. They have a couple different ones coming up, one coming in summer 2020, I believe, and fall 2020. And I think that they look like interesting designs, and I'm hoping to get a chance to check them out also. As for the price, I actually didn't look. I wanted to kind of evaluate this not based on price. I just wanted to evaluate it as a knife, especially being that I didn't have to buy it. But I was told by River's Edge Cutlery that it's around the $130 to $150 range, I believe. Something like that, and I'm sure you can find out if you go to River's Edge Cutlery and search for them. They said that very few dealers have gotten them so far, so I would suggest going to River's Edge Cutlery to get yours if you decide to get one of these. And I would say if you're looking for a small, modern knife with some really interesting traditional or vintage aesthetic inspirations, then this Finch Knife Company Runtly is going to be a good option, and I think that you should definitely follow and watch what comes next from the Finch Knife Company. So if you've enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell for notifications, and again, check out my website, knifethoughts.com. Subscribe there via email so you get updates when I post new articles, and as always, don't forget to go out and do good.